Well, number 12, we've come to the end of money. Today, I want you to have that piece of paper again because there's a couple of films I want you to watch. They're too long to show on this presentation, but I'd like you to write down the links so that you can click your computer and watch it later on and watch the whole thing through. I want to talk to you today about alternatives, alternative currency, but alternative ideas about money and so on. There are some already around, but people aren't that familiar with it. They don't always know about it. So today, to end up, we're going to be thinking about alternatives. I think the only problem with some of the alternatives is we would need governments and more than one government of more than one country to say, okay, we're going to opt to a new kind of system. But there are alternatives out there, and so on. We need to be serious about them and think about them. Who's going to do that? Now, alternative currencies. Do you think this is genuine? One Lewes Pound. What do you think? Actually, it is. And Lewes is an area in East Sussex, and it was inspired by the Tontine pound, and the currency was introduced with the blessing of the Town Council in September 2008. And the idea of it is it challenges all sorts of things. And as you go around Lewes, as I've done, you walk around and you'll see a sign in the shop saying Lewes Pound accepted here. What's the idea? I don't know why they've got a currency of £21, but they have. So you've got a £21 note. The value of the Lewes Pound is fixed at £1 sterling. So one Lewes Pound is the same value as £1 sterling. And since January 2009, it may be used in approximately 130 shops in Lewes. It started off with just 70 shops when the currency was introduced. Despite its nominal value, some businesses charge a lesser fee if you pay in Lewes Pounds than if you pay in ordinary pounds. So, I don't know, they'll say, well, this is £10 if you pay in ordinary pounds, but we'll charge you £9.50 if you use Lewes Pounds for £9 of it. And some of the earliest pounds have been sold on things like eBay for much higher value than they actually are. But they're really, a Lewes Pound is worth £1. There's 10 Lewes Pounds. They seem too pretty to spend, don't they? Now, what's the whole point of alternative currency? Well, it helps a local economy in lots of different ways. It's really just a voucher or a token that can be traded locally as complementary to the real currency and used alongside the pound sterling. But what really happens is that money circulated locally, or local currency circulates locally and benefits the local economy. Money spent in national chains doesn't. The Lewes Pound encouraged demand for local goods and services. In turn, this builds a resilience to the rising cost of energy, transport and food, because you're tending to be buying absolutely locally. The Lewes Pound was driven by three considerations, main considerations anyway. Economic. According to the New Economics Foundation, money spent locally stays within the community and is reused many times, multiplying the wealth and building resilience to that local economy. Environmentally, it supports local businesses and goods and reduces the need for transport costs and minimises our carbon footprint, which we hear a lot about these days. Socially, by spending money in local outlets, the community strengthens the relationship between local shopkeepers and the community. It also supports people finding new ways to make a living. So it's all good. Here's a little chart of how the Lewes Pound works. The Lewes Pound also benefits shoppers by creating stronger and more local shops, thus increasing a sense of pride in the community, decreasing CO2 emissions and increasing economic resilience. It also increases local footfall. Do you know what footfall is? It's the amount of people that pass your shop front, and local business activity. So it encourages people to buy locally, and of course, as I've already said, it increases customer loyalty and the whole level of shopping. And here's a thing that you see in Lewes as you wander around the town. You'll see this in all sorts of shops. That logo there, Lewes Pound. What it means is that this shop will take a Lewes Pound as well as an ordinary pound. So when you see that sign and you're in the system and you've bought your Lewes Pounds, which costs you £1, you can use it in one of those shops. There's actually nothing new about the Lewes Pound. In fact, Lewes had its own currency between 1789 and 1895. And complementary currencies have existed since the beginning of a civilization, from the bead money of Papua New Guinea, which still exists, to the WIR, that's a really interesting one, established between world wars and now used by 16% of Swiss businesses. I'll talk about the WIR a little bit later on. Such currencies often created by local merchants, governments and citizens during times of economic change, inflation or unemployment. Recent examples exist in Argentina and Japan. The town of Berkshire in Massachusetts has issued over $1.5 million of Berkshires, that's another alternative currency, into circulation since it started a few years ago, and it is accepted by 300 shops and adopted even by nearby towns to where the main town is. Closer to home, the Tontine Pound is now in its third phase of development. Here's a Tontine Pound. Worth just the same as an ordinary pound sterling. If you think the Lewes and the Tontine Pound is weird, strange and unique, think again. I'm just going to show you in a moment all following different places in the UK that use alternative currency. Some of them might surprise you. There's much more than the Lewes Pound. The one I very first heard of was not the Lewes Pound, but was in fact the Stroud Pound. That's the first one I ever heard of in my life, and it's a really interesting one. It's been going for a long time. The Stroud Pound. If you live in London, how about this one? The Brixton Pound. Or maybe you live in Bristol. Here's a Bristol Pound. Or the Exeter Pound. All of these alternative currencies are by their very nature localized. But let's go worldwide. And this is really a bit of a new phenomenon, and the one I'm going to talk about is not the only one, but it's probably the most well known. Have you ever heard of Bitcoin? It's a cryptocurrency. In other words, it's a digital currency, and it's like digital gold. There is a finite supply that can be mined every year using sophisticated software. This is called blockchain technology. What I want to explain is the social implications of such technology being implemented by scale, and it is being implemented. There's a lot of hype about Bitcoin. What's interesting about Bitcoin is it's a decentralized system, and the fear within the world's financial systems is that governments would lose control over the economy. This would mean it's a more authentic version of a free market. The currencies would exchange at the rate of the market with no interventions by any government. It is secure and private. One can remain anonymous while using Bitcoin. Much more difficult if using a credit card or currency. Its value cannot be pegged to any country, which means if you live in places like Venezuela, and you remember I was talking about the inflation in places like Zimbabwe and Venezuela, where the local currency is so volatile, something like Bitcoin actually holds its value. It doesn't always, it does go up and down. But there are risks to decentralisation of currencies as follows. No one is overseeing the valuation, which can mean that it's extremely volatile, it fluctuates a lot. Money laundering, that's money used to buy drugs and so on, this could occur especially overseas to and from other countries without interacting at all with any government regulations, so you can push the money around. And if anybody knows anything about it, and I get those things, I've spotted you doing bad things and I'm going to report you to everybody, and they always want paying in Bitcoin. Creators of digital currency are not at all required to comply with the financial institutions. In itself, this isn't bad. It just means that they can create their own rules, so they're not the rules of any country or any government. This all means lack of regulation. Like the previous point, no one is overseeing the process. Could we have a money system not based on debt? That's another question, another alternative way of thinking. We could go back to the gold standard. The gold standard wasn't based on debt, it was based on gold. So here's a true story and its history, especially in the USA. And this is how we've talked about it lots of time, but this is a reminder, there's a review of what we've learnt already. The Federal Reserve System, going to explain it, was created in 1913 as the central bank and monetary authority in the United States. It consisted of 12 central banks in 12 Federal Reserve districts around the country. This is America, of course. And this man, there's his name, but who is he anyway? So why is he important? Well, he was the governor of the Federal Reserve System in 1941. On September the 30th that year, Eccles was asked to give testimony before the House Committee on Banking and Currency. The purpose of the hearing was to obtain information regarding the role of the Federal Reserve in creating conditions that led to the Depression of the 1930s. So this is 1941. And something really interesting had happened, probably for the first time. Congressman Wright Patman, who was chairman of the committee, asked how the Federal Reserve got the money to purchase $2 billion worth of government bonds in 1933. This is the exchange that followed. The answer from Eccles was, "We created it." The chairman, John Patman, said, "Out of what?" Eccles, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank, says, "Out of the right to issue money." John Patman says, "And there's nothing behind it except our government's credit." And the answer from the Federal Reserve Bank, "That is what our money system is. If there were no debts in our money system, there would be no money." We've heard that a few times, haven't we? Eccles' explanation to Patman simply meant, in artistic terms, how absurd. When you think about how money works and what our system is, it is absurd. Patman was horrified at the tragic absurdity of the current financial system, and it is understandable that he was horrified. The government, together with some powerful bankers, established a system in 1913 that typically works like this. Every dollar of the monetary base, or as it's called, narrow money or high-powered money, comes into existence with a one-to-one increase in the public debt, collectively owed by us, the taxpayers. Then private banks use that base to create more money or more dollars or more pounds in broad money that comes into existence with a one-to-one increase in private debt. Going the other way, If all people in the private sector ever paid off all their debts and the federal government paid off all of its bondholders, the supply of US dollars would be virtually extinguished. This is the sense in which our fiat money, there's that phrase again, fractional reserve system uses debt-based money. Although market prices are flexible and can react to deflation much better than most people realise, it's still true that our system is tragically crazy. There's another system operating in Switzerland. I said I was going to talk to you about that. And it's the largest and the biggest alternative money system in the world. And it came from the home of financial conservatism, Switzerland. In Basel, there is a national bank, the bank WIR, that since 1934 has issued its own currency. Each WIR is equivalent, like that Lewes Pound. One Lewes Pound is worth one British pound. The WIR is equivalent to one Swiss franc, but it cannot be exchanged for them. It merely acts as an accounting system for the trade value amongst its 70,000 business members. So it's got 70,000 members who are part of this alternative currency. About $2 billion of value, $2 billion that is, of value of trade is traded between the members in this alternative currency. Of the participants, 80% are small firms that find their membership important for keeping their business going during economic downturn. That is when the banks restrict new credit, especially in small businesses. And so at such times as those, the firms increase their use of WIR to buy inventory from other participating firms. Independent research has found that the WIR has helped the Swiss economy suffer less severe economic cycles as its neighbours do. Or a new suggestion. Here's a new one that I've just recently picked up, a new way of an alternative system. At the moment, our system is money is created by the government, goes through the banks, and actually currency is created by the banks as they lend and lend and lend and charge you interest and interest and interest, all based on debt. If you created a system, say in England, where the economy was controlled by a group that was just for the benefit of the society, both for coins and notes and all the electronic money held in the bank accounts. Because banks create money and they're creating against a debt, and money is debt-based. In the new system, if we created money without anyone else having to go into debt, it creates money that is debt-free. This money can be used to pay off existing debt without reducing the amount of money in the economy. Here's how it works. Around 80 members of a board of banks. That's how, on the left-hand side, you can see how our current system works. On the right-hand side, this is how the new system would work. Nobody's doing it, by the way, but it's an idea. So it's a public body working in the public interest, and their decisions are based on the health of the wider economy. Again, on the left-hand side is what happens. On the right-hand side is how it would work. House prices. Now, there's a really hard one. In 1996, if you wanted to buy a house, it was probably going to cost you 17.5% of your salary, the amount that you earned every month. 17.5% of it was going to be paid to your mortgage where you live. So the rest is spent on food, entertainment, whatever, your holiday and so on. But 17.5% of the households in the UK buying their house, that would go on the mortgage. Today, 2013, that's not even today, 33% of a person's salary is likely to go on the cost of their housing. There are many reforms needed to fix the housing market, but our system would help prevent banks from creating new money to fuel the bubble. This would slow down the cycle and dampen house price bubbles. Some more thinking about alternatives, okay? Here we go. What about the Amish? Do you know about the Amish? There are people that live mainly in Pennsylvania in the USA. They never use banks, although sometimes I had a friend in America who said that they have to come to the bank sometimes to sign contracts, and he was telling me a story about a farmer that came to buy a field off his next door neighbour who wasn't Amish, and he said the man turned up at the bank with his wife and a milk churn like the one you're looking at on that photograph, and inside the milk churn, when he opened it, was thousands and thousands of dollars. And how the Amish save their money, because they don't put it in the banks, they put it in milk churns and bury it in their fields. The only thing is that when this particular man, so my friend was telling me, came to pay his bill, he shouted at his wife and said, "You've dug up the wrong milk churn. This one's got $250,000. The other one's only got $200,000. It's a $200,000 milk churn that I wanted." They're a sort of a Christian group. They do some really strange things. I don't know how much you know about the Amish. They don't believe in cars. It's too modern. They still drive horse and carts. Actually, the horse and cart you're looking at, even though it's a couple in there, having been to Pennsylvania and studied it a little bit, I would say that couple is not married, because if they were married, he would be driving a horse and cart where his wife could sit in the back in the dry. So that's how you can tell when they're going along the road whether they're married or not. They don't wear buttons. Isn't that funny? So I remember saying to somebody, well, if they don't wear buttons, what do? Well, they use pins to pin their clothes up, because somehow or other buttons are worldly, very unspiritual. I don't really know why buttons are unspiritual, but there you go, that's what they do. They don't believe in deodorants that the Westerners use, so they make their own. Actually, I have to tell you, I hope you won't mind, and I hope the Amish won't mind, but I have stood behind Amish in supermarkets in the USA, and I wanted to say I wish I wasn't standing behind you, and I wish you did believe in deodorants. That's just my own personal experience. Amish County, or Amish Country, there's all of them. It's one of the funny things I noticed in the USA in Pennsylvania is, and what's quite horrifying, is they tend to drive those things on the wrong side of the road. Yes, I know that America drives on the right-hand side of the road, but sometimes I'd be driving on the right-hand side of the road and coming towards me on the same side is a horse and cart, and I'm wondering what on earth's going on, because they have sort of little lanes for their horse and carts. And actually at the supermarkets, like the big supermarkets like Walmart, you go there and they've still got a long iron bar for the Amish to tie their horse and carts up when they go shopping in the supermarket. Another interesting thing that they do is, if you get married, they build you a house. They do trade, they do buy land, as I've already said about my friend and the big milk churns. They actually become self-sufficient in food, and they're really a self-sufficient community in lots of ways. Remember another alternative that we talked about in one of the previous lectures on the year of Jubilee. It really is an alternative way of thinking about economy. If we could cancel the debt, go back to zero, start again. Not a bad idea, is it? I had some friends I was in touch with some years ago, and I thought their idea was very clever, but other of my friends objected and said that's a terrible idea, it encourages the wrong thing. What they actually did is they went to the banks who were lending money to developing countries. So say something like Barclays, and they would say to the bank, does third world country owe you £10 million? The bank would say, yes, they do. My friend's charity would then ask, how much do you think you will get back? And when do you expect that country will repay the loan that you've lent them? And often the banks would say they won't, was often the reply. They will default and we will have to wipe off the debt. We'll lose all the money. So my friend's charity then said, oh, in that case, if we bought the debt off you, you can buy debt. Isn't that a weird idea? But you can buy debt. If we bought the debt off you, say for £1 million, so you're buying a £10 million debt for £1 million, would you be happy? The bank, of course, they're not going to get anything anyway. They say, oh, absolutely, certainly. We would love to have £1 million of that debt repaid. So my friend's charity would then buy the £1 million debt off, say, Barclays. And the charity would then go to the country that owed the money and say, you don't owe it to Barclays anymore. You owe us £10 million. However, we're going to let you repay that debt in local currency. So if it was Ghana, it would be in cedis. If it was Nigeria, it would be in naira or whatever currency it was. Now, what you've got to understand is that most of those payments, because they're lent by Western banks, would have been lent in the currency of that country. So they would have lent it in either pounds or dollars or Swiss francs or something like that. And the country that was borrowing the money would have to pay that money back in pounds or dollars or Swiss francs. And for a developing country, that is very hard. But if they were able to pay that £10 million back in the currency of the country, that becomes much easier. And then what would happen is my friend's charity would say, OK, pay us back the 10 million in your local currency, and we're going to use it to build hospitals, schools, water development, and so on. I thought it was a fantastic plan. Not all my friends agreed at all. What do you think? Think it was a good idea or a bad idea? This is a quote from a friend of mine, and I think it's well worth the quote. He says, the root of fallenness is consumerism. This is grounded in eat all the fruit except the one forbidden fruit. Remember the story in Genesis? The nature of limitation within generosity is the way that things are set up. Consumerism says, I saw, I took, I consumed. The Old Testament has many emphases on issues of boundaries, from the distribution to the tribes and families. Do not move the boundary marker. One of the things we don't understand when we're reading the Old Testament in the Bible, it constantly talks about markers and not moving them. Consumerism seeks to increase the market share, other people's share, by default, therefore, decreases. That's what consumerism is about. So, remove not the ancient landmarks which thy fathers have set. If you did that, really what you're doing is robbing another person of their land, because you're moving the marker to somewhere else and you're perhaps moving it a bit towards their land, so your land gets bigger because their land gets smaller. That's the whole basis of consumerism. The Old Testament sees how it is vital to consider the poor and not always strategize for maximising profits. You listen to companies talk in the UK and they always talk about the bottom line. We need to maximise the bottom line. What are they talking about? They're talking about maximising profit. The loss of potential profits is necessary for the health of society. We should not really just think in terms of profit. That's why I like things like the Tridus Bank, because they say, what is the benefit to the community of the trade that you're doing? In the Old Testament, the rich landowners were commanded to leave the corners of their field and any dropped harvest for the poor, the orphan, the widow, and the immigrant. In other words, if you wanted to maximise the profit, you collected every piece of wheat from your field that you possibly could. If you wanted to lose money or lose profit, if some dropped out, you left it. But you left it for the poor and those who didn't have enough, who could go and collect it and make their living from collecting some of your profit or potential profit. Get the story? Get the idea? It's the same principle as Jesus gets so cross in the temple over the money changers. They found a way of making, if you like, illegal profit. It wasn't really necessary to change the Roman currency to buy a sacrifice to offer to God. And God said, I'm not interested in that. I don't care where the money comes from. You just do what you do. And that's why Jesus gets so angry about the money changers. My friend also says that what we need to do is to lose money and gain people. Lose being controlled by money and find freedom. If money controls you, you're trapped. But if you lose money to gain freedom, that's a worthwhile thing. I often ask people, do you really think that Jesus did not know that Judas was stealing the money that was given? I reckon he did know. He chose to lose the money to gain the person. Work, my friend again says, what is work? What is it? An activity, not a location. All activity takes place at a location and is called work. But its defining characteristic involves making items for helping people. It's not doing what you're told, but what the situation requires. Work requires monetary compensation to enable people to continue working, though the actual reward comes from autonomously engaging in mastering a skill or problem in pursuit of a purpose. We tie money to employment. Paul in the New Testament of the Bible ties food to work. Is all employment work? Is it? Do I have to be employed to work? Can I be unemployed but work? I think a redefinition of work may be needed. My friend said he sees it tied to the creation mandate. Some forms of employment are reflective of a fallen trajectory, not a redemptive one. Is making money work? Some people just make money. Is that really work? Okay, watch this short documentary and you can see the clip there at the end. So get your notepaper out, write that down and watch the film a little bit later on. It's all about money and government and how it works.
Why do we need to fundamentally rethink money? We could tell you it's because there's a mathematical trap built into our current Ponzi scheme money system. A ticking time bomb of perpetually expanding debt that must eventually blow up again with devastating consequences. We could point out that the banking crisis of 2008 and its aftermath of bailouts and get-out-of-jail-free cards for corrupt bankers shows us clearly that the current system of bank finance is mathematically unsound and that the biggest banks are above the law. We could remind you that the bank's monopoly on this credit money is designed to profit the owners of those banks at the expense of everyone else. And we should inform you that recent changes in the laws will allow banks to bail themselves out with our savings the next time their greed-driven bubble bursts. But given your arrival at this website, it is likely you know some or all of this already. The question is, what can anyone do about it?
Right, there's that link. Watch the rest of the film. It's well worth it. It's only about 10 or 15 minutes long, something like that, and you'll enjoy that, but it's probably a bit long to put in our process today. So have a look. And we heard this phrase once before, but I want you to look at this guy, remember what he said about government and control. Rothschild, I care not what puppet is placed on the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire. And I control the British money supply. That's what he said. So, is he right? Now, when you put your money in the bank, 74% believe that they were the legal owners of the money in their current account rather than the bank. Actually, that's not true. The bank, when you put it in there, the bank owns it. Paradoxically, 61% know that their money was lent out, even though 67% wanted the convenience of, I want my money now, on-demand access, in other words. The bank actually takes legal ownership of the money that you bank. The bank records that they owe you, the customer, whatever has been deposited. They have a liability, they owe you the money, but they have the right to do with it whatever they choose while it's in their vaults. So is it yours or is it theirs? Hence, 1,000 deposited can be found successively for some 200 times, retaining 10% for the time. There's a thing there you can read. Have a look at that as well later on. And we've done this before, but let's do it one more time just for fun. So your original deposit can create 10 times the amount of the original deposit, whereas Lehman Brothers that collapsed were using a 30% factor. Banks are not legally bound and do not hold your money ready to give it back. There is a promise on demand, and only if that is backed by government. In the recent crash in the United Kingdom, when banks crashed, the government stepped in and decided that they would guarantee £80,000 if you got that much money in the bank and the bank went bust. The government would somehow give it you from the deposit that's been created. Okay, folks, that's money. What shall we do now? Think about it all. Do your self-tests and your mastery tests. Send them to me. I hope you've enjoyed the course. I've enjoyed talking about it, and a lot of it's interesting and fun and sometimes challenging, and some of it, isn't it a little bit frightening as to where we are? Remember that last phrase, if you get controlled by money, you become a slave to it. Let's be generous.